working? There it goes. What the heck? All right. Technical difficulties aside, we are up and rolling. We are, looks like rolling solo with Outlaw today. Wasn't able to get a hold of him. We had set it up, but when it came time to actually get him on the line, I wasn't able to do it. So because of the obvious start to the game coming up in about 15 minutes, I pretty much had to push through and just get the show on the road. So I didn't even get my thumbnail changed behind me. Slacking, DDP, slacking. Let me get this fixed right quick. Thankfully, it's a real quick process for me. Now, today the Cowboys are headed to Washington for a matchup with the Washington Redskins. Now, a couple things to note here. Washington jumped out to a 17-point lead in Philadelphia last week. Washington, they're on an improving track, but they're still banged up. And Dallas does still have more talent on its roster than Washington does. A couple big things. It looks like Jonathan Abrams is out. That's going to be huge for Dallas because that guy is a force in the middle of the defense. Additionally, you have the fact that Darius Geis is out for, well, it's indefinite right now. He had to have a surgery on his knee to clean up a torn meniscus. As a result, you have the very interesting situation where last week, for the first time in his career, Adrian Peterson was inactive for a game, a healthy scratch, because Jay Gruden, the Redskins coach, decided, yeah, you know what? Apparently, Jay Gruden wanted to cut Adrian in camp, but ownership, Snyder, said no. As a result of that, you have some tension between the two, and apparently, not only did Jay make Adrian inactive, not only pissing off veterans on his team and Adrian himself, but then going a step further and basically saying to the media when asked about it, like, look, if we were going back to the 1980s and running the ball 30, 40 times a game, then maybe I would look at Adrian. Well, come to find out, Darius Geis is out indefinitely with a knee injury, and now Gruden had to go back to Adrian and basically be like, oh, please forgive me. It wasn't even about you. It was this guy. You look good. I need you out there, man. Please run the ball for me. Adrian Peterson is going to be a Hall of Famer. There's no doubt. AD all day. That was my first ride or die Sooner growing up. But it is an interesting situation at the same time where they really need to figure out what they're going to do. Like, they didn't run the ball a whole lot last week. They just kept dropping back and throwing it with Case Keenum. Case Keenum's not bad, but they're not ready to usher in the Dwayne Haskins era yet. It might be a little premature, but I think that that's something they should ultimately consider doing because I think it'll have a big impact for them when they do that. I think that's how you get them kind of trending back in the right direction ultimately. The Redskins are they're a much improved defense over what we saw last week with the Giants. But that said, I think the true test of this game is going to be, everyone's going to point to Dak. How's the offense going to respond? How's Dak? Can Dak string together back-to-back weeks like this? How is that going to look? That is a valid question. But for me, the bigger question is, how is the Cowboys' defense going to respond? Now, I know the Giants, I almost said Wizards. The Redskins don't have anyone as explosive as Saquon. Adrian Peterson at 34 years old is not like Saquon Barkley at this point, obviously. But Dallas still has given up a lot of explosive plays. If you look at like last season, and I wrote on this last week, if you didn't read it, I'll quickly give a rehash. If you look at the first 12 weeks of last season, that's through the New Orleans game, Dallas gave up a total of 35 explosive plays. Now, that's a play of 20 or more yards. They limited them rather well. When you're talking like 3 a game at that point, that's rather well. Under 3 a game. Since that time, since that Saints game last year, we've seen 7 games from the Cowboys, and they've given up 30 suddenly. They gave up a few last week, not just the 59-yarder from Saquon Barkley at the start of the game, but you also saw other instances as well. Eli Manning, when he escapes the Dorrance Armstrong would-be sack, he finds a wide-open 22-yard reception to, I think that was Cody Latimer at the time. I mean, you just have situations like that where the team, for whatever reason, giving up these plays. They're leaking explosive plays at a rate about 50% higher than they were. Again, 35 and 12. Now in the last 7, 30. That's a 50% increase approximately, and a little over half the time. So that's a concern. They're going to have to figure out something to do about that. And I don't think the Redskins have the explosive playmakers to really burn you like that, but they didn't look bad. I mean, they jumped out pretty well against Philadelphia in the first half last week in Philly, and then they kind of faltered in the second half. So Dallas needs to come out here, and they need to be aggressive offensively. Again, the Giants do not have the kind of firepower, did not last week have the kind of firepower that Washington can roll out this week. So it's going to be a little bit tougher, but I want to see how the defense responds, because of those, as I'm talking about explosive plays that the Cowboys defense has allowed, the biggest concern to me has been the run defense. The run defense has struggled since that Saints game. I mean, we know, of course, what the Rams did to us. We know, yeah, the Seahawks didn't do much in that playoff game, but we know that the Cowboys' run defense has struggled. Barkley had 11 touches for like 127 or 128 yards, something like that, and he basically averaged 10 yards a touch in that game, which is absurd. So that's a concern. You're going to have to improve that, and it's because Dallas, specifically Rod Marinelli, likes to employ the kind of undersized defensive line so that he can focus on pass rushing, and it's not as much about run blocking. So when you're up and you're kind of pinning your ears back, that works great. But as we saw in the Rams game last year, when you're not up, suddenly those undersized guys can get bullied a little bit. So that's kind of what happened in that case. It's one of those things they're just going to have to find a way to improve on. Shout out in the house to Diego. What's up? Maestras. Gabriel Paulin. What's up? Darren1412. And let's see. DC is the name 88. What's good? Darren says, go Cowboys. Cool hair, bro. Appreciate it. DC is the name 88. Dallas needs to stop the run. We've been looking like bums and don't let up offensively. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much the notes for this game. The Cowboys need to address these things first and foremost. Again, Washington has a pretty stout defensive line. They are a little banged up. They don't have the kind of weapons out there. Here's the big difference between this game last year in Washington and this year. Amari Cooper. If you recall, when Dallas lost in Washington last year, they would have gone to, I think, overtime had it not been for the ridiculous penalty on long snapper LP Ladouceur, which then mitigated the, or not mitigated, whatever. It canceled out basically a made field goal from Brett Maher, backed him up 5 yards. He misses the re-kick, and Dallas loses a heartbreaker in that game. That dropped Dallas to 3-5 in the season. Dallas used that game to basically say, all right, yeah, we need a number one receiver, and it's painfully obvious. Let's go get Oakland on the phone because we've heard that they're shopping Amari Cooper. Dallas gives up a first, and the team has not looked back since in terms of the offense. Now, we saw them then play later in the season against Washington. Was that Thanksgiving Day? I feel like that was Thanksgiving Day. And Amari Cooper had something like 6 catches for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns in that matchup. That's the difference. The reason why Dallas was not quite better than Washington last year in Washington, even though Adrian Peterson ran for 99 yards in that game, even though the defense played pretty well in that game for the most part, they just couldn't get the big plays. You did see Michael Gallup's first career touchdown catch that in Washington last year. He's obviously breaking out in a big way right now. He is my Cowboys X factor of the season to watch in terms of the offensive side of the ball. But they have to figure out some things for sure. I think Dallas is far and away the more talented team. I think it's going to be a greater test for the offense and for Kellen Moore, not just his first game as an offensive coordinator on the road, let alone in the division, and in a place where some kind of wonky stuff has happened for the Cowboys in recent years. But specifically the fact that they're not going to have everything they want. They might get a lot of what they want. Against the Giants, they could have it all. And a lot of that people, Josh Norman talking about Dak trying to undersell what he did against the Giants, like, whatever, anyone can do that. What you're overlooking in that case is that a big part of what success Dak had in that game against the Giants was the offensive play calling. it schemed things open. If you looked at the Cowboys, the pre-snap motion they had was off the charts in that game. Way, way higher than we saw with Scott Linehan as coach. You had plays where before the snap, 4 different motions were occurring. A guy would go to the left side of the game, come all the way back to the right side. You'd have several bodies moving simultaneously. Now, you could get into the situation, especially early in the year, as you guys kind of adapt to that, where you could have a pre-snap penalty. But for the most part, it keeps defenses guessing. You saw confusion on the Giants. Perfect example of that was the Zeke screen pass that goes for, I think, 22 yards last week. 4 guys move, pre-snap motion, sets it up, gets enough of the Giants defense second guessing and going the wrong direction. Easy check down. And I think that mitigated a holding penalty as well, which, those are drive killers anytime you have a 10 or 15 yard penalty. So for Dallas to kind of get back from that was, I think, a big achievement for them. That's something that Dallas will have to continue with this. They're going to have to try and keep Washington off balance. And then Josh Norman will see, hey, when you're schemed open, the whole point is to give your quarterback, no matter his level of competency, if he's a bum of a quarterback, how do you get a bum at least playing decent? Oh, you give him some easy throws, some easy wide open throws. If he's a Hall of Famer like a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers, how do you get him going and give him some easy production? Oh, you give him easy throws by scheming things. When you line up like the Cowboys have the past several years on offense, and you basically have little to no pre-snap motion, no trickery or misdirection, the Cowboys would tell you, oh, well, that's us. We're keeping everything very basic, very simple, because then there's less things that can be messed up. Well, what's the obvious flaw in that logic? How do you think the defender looks at it when they come off the field? When we as fans can call what's about to come their way, of course the defenders and entire defenses can see what's coming their way. I mean, think about even if you go back to 2014, Patrick Peterson coming off the field early in the year, and that was the game that you didn't have Romo. He missed the one game. That was 2014 then, not 16. Coming off the field, and he's basically saying, yo, Dez runs 3 routes. There's three things you gotta guard against, and they're so predictable in terms of when they employ it. If nothing else, just keep them off balance, and you'll completely change the dynamic. Even last year, with Amari Cooper coming in, that made the Scott Linehan play calling a little better, just because you had better talent to employ it. But when you have now the talent and the misdirection in that regard, and actually scheme guys open and play them to their strengths, it's night and day. And we saw that in week 1. Now, I don't think week 1 is the standard bearer for the Cowboys offense for the season, but I do think that Dallas is probably looking at a pretty strong offensive day again. They had 35 last week. That was going into the fourth quarter. I think this is going to be a 27-14 game is my feeling on this. I think it's actually a bit tight early on, just like Washington played Philly tight initially last week. And I think Dallas, in the end, they have the better talent. They have the better dogs. They're less banged up. And I think you're going to see them pull away. Now, I know this is a super short stream. I'm going only about 15 minutes. But the game is about to start in 3 minutes. I'm not doing a watch party setup like this, a game companion, if you will. I might jump on here after the game, depending on how things shake out. But we'll find a way to make up that time. If nothing else, I'll be on tomorrow night with Big Game James, and we'll run it back and talk post-game show. But I wanted to talk about a couple things here real quick before I jump off. Yes, Taco Charlton is inactive again this week. Yes, you are hearing reports that he asked for a trade in the preseason, which in line with his comments after, I think, the first or second preseason game matches up considerably. I talked about it then. I wrote about it at the time. Like, it's a guy who is signaling his own way out the door. We can officially say Taco Charlton was a bust of a draft pick for us. A first-round pick. As great as we've been at making draft picks in the last, 5-6 years, whatever, Taco Charlton is a disastrous blemish for us. Now, he's shown flashes. He's got ability. He could be a pretty decent rotational player for us. But he was anointed the war daddy by Jerry Jones going into that draft saying, hey, we're going after a war daddy. Well, first of all, at pick 27, you're probably not finding a war daddy. You're definitely not finding one when his strength is left end, which is already where you have DeMarcus Lawrence shining at that point. So you're taking him and you're playing him out of his strength position in that case. And he just doesn't have the ability to really be that guy. And so now, here you are. Yeah, you took him over TJ Watt. That was a disaster. I know it's hindsight, but even at the time, people were kind of looking at each other like, did Dallas really just do that? We made that choice. Taco, who had, he had a decent senior year, but nothing amazing at Michigan. It is what it is, man. He's inactive. Dallas is trying to see if they can trade him. I don't know what value you're going to get for him. I know that there's also talk of like Minkah Fitzpatrick. Fantastic safety from the Dolphins. He's just a great general defensive back. The Alabama product. Yeah, if you can get him, his cap figure is absurdly low the next 3 years. So I would love to have him. He is at a position that Dallas doesn't typically like to invest big money. It's why I think they don't keep Byron Jones, although they could if they could somehow talk him into a Jalen Smith type deal. I just look at it and I think that probably anyone thinking that Dallas can get like Taco in a second for Fitzpatrick, I don't think that's going to do it. I think Miami is going to hold firm for a first round pick. So then, okay, could you get a first round pick? You gave up this past year's first round pick for Amari Cooper. So as long as you're getting the production and you got the years left in the deal to make it worthwhile, I think it's good if you're talking about his rookie contract at that point. So I'd probably do it if I can give up a first rounder and get rid of Taco Charlton, thereby canceling out the roster spot I'd have to open up, although the 46-man roster, game day roster, is different. They're going to have to figure that out, and that's something that they're going to have to look at. If I can get Minkah Fitzpatrick, I absolutely do it, especially for a team that's trying to win now. But we'll see. I think Taco is officially a bust and a disaster for us. Fitzpatrick would be a great replacement, further solidify our defense a little bit, our secondary in particular. And the only other quick thing I'll throw out now, it's the second straight game that also second round pick Tristan Hill is inactive. That could be troublesome as well, because that means, Connor McGovern lost for the season already with the pectoral injury. He's out as well, so you're looking at Tony Pollard as your fourth round pick as the only guy with any kind of impact in these games. Week 1, Pollard wasn't able or allowed to do much of anything. They did run him a couple routes, but nothing fancy. And then in terms of running between the tackles, he was just there in relief of Zeke, and the defense teed off on him. So his numbers really weren't impressive at all week 1. Dallas, they got a lot of talent. I'm hoping that Tristan Hill can kind of put it together and figure it out. It's obviously 2 games into his career, so I'm not going to call him a bust. But there were warning flags about Taco a couple games into his career too, and those ended up proving to be true. When you don't have the effort, when you don't have the willingness to buy in and really play hard and play for your teammates, it's going to show, and it's going to leave you behind in the system. And that's what happened at Taco. I'm hoping that's not what's going to happen with Tristan Hill. But I'm going to wrap up this thing. The game has already started, so I'm going to go watch it as well. Thank you for those who tuned in. I will be back on here. If not later today, I will be back tomorrow night with Big Game James, maybe Law Nation if he's got the time, to run it back and talk post-game with you guys. So, till next time, guys, remember, every legend was once a prospect.